things. Number one, it reinforces the legacies of colonialism. Number two, it has promoted extractive economic models. Number three, it has resulted in systemic exploitation and inequalities which have harmed African economies. And finally, it has placed a disproportionate burden on African economies to manage the adverse effects of global economic policies, particularly through the special drawing rights. So at this point, I'm going to call upon a victim. Her name is Tyreen Wasonga, and she's going to narrate to you her story about the direct impact of the global financial system on her social well-being and her economic livelihood. So Terry, please take the stage.
Honorable Commissioners, my name is Tyreen Wasonga. Sorry. Honorable Commissioners, my name is Tyreen Wasonga, a law graduate from Kumbukeni University. I'm one of many Kenyans caught in the shadows of decisions made far away from home. Decisions signed off in air-conditioned boardrooms have never stepped foot in. I stand here not just as a citizen of Kenya, but as a reason why the global financial architecture must change. It was never designed with people like me in mind. The system was born in 1944 at Bretton Woods, at the time when Africa was still shackled in colonial chains. We had no voice, no vote, no say, and no seat at the table. Yet, from the meeting, the IMF and WorldBank were backed. Institutions that dictate policies in my country, institutions that hold pen that oppresses us, and decades later, even after independence, little has changed. In 2024, all African nations combined hold only 7% IMF voting power. We get a mere 5% of the total SDRs out of the total $660 billion. Ironically, these SDRs were meant to offer relief.
Please slow down a bit. You're a little bit too fast.
Too fast? Yeah. Sorry for that. Ironically, these SDRs were meant to offer relief to the debt-distressed nations like mine. But in practice, they have become lifelines for the wealthy, not the struggling. Power still following money, and countries like mine were told to tighten their belts. Because of this imbalance, Kenya is forced to borrow just to survive. And for that borrowing, it comes with conditionalities. So one of the conditionalities include increased taxes, reduce of subsidies, cutting spending, and for this matter, this was established in our 2024 financial bill, which caused an uproar and the birth of the Gen Z movement. So we took to the streets. We marched to the streets, not as the rebels, not as criminals, but people who could not sit down and watch economy overtake humanity. I was among the Gen Z, the Mandamano movement. We were tear-gassed, arrested, dismissed, but that did not stop us. The Gen Z movement is a movement that states that when the government is silent on its people, then the street shall speak. And we spoke loudly. And we are still not silent. We are still speaking. And until that shall be resolved, then we shall not rest. And in cutting public spending, the Linda Mama initiative that helps the women to deliver freely was also cut. Okay, explain to me how somebody who's unemployed is supposed to deliver in a private hospital. Explain to me how an unemployed person like me is supposed to feed on 3 meals. I mean, we are forced to choose between the basic shelter and the necessary medicine, because both those two doesn't go hand in hand in Kenya. You have to choose for the unemployed like us. I'm jobless, just like many youth in my country, fully dependent on my parents, who are also already among the highest taxed because they are employed. Taxes in Kenya take over 40% of salaries. You are like, if it takes 40% of your salary, you are remaining with 60%. In that 60%, you are supposed to pay school fee, a housing levy that you're not even guaranteed you're going to stay in it. In that 60%, you have to cater for medicine and for your school-going children. I mean, how fair is that? I guess the silence takes it. Kenya currently has a debt. Kenya's current debt stands at 11.3 trillion, meaning if each Kenyan paid their individual debt with a population of 57 people, each person would owe 199,000 Kenya shillings, which is basically like $1,500. At this point, you are unemployed. Taxes are rising. You have a debt to pay, a debt that you did not sign for. Policies that you were never in the room when they were being signed. System that doesn't favor you, that doesn't favor us as the youths. Where are we heading as a continent, as a country to be specific? And again, the silence takes it. I hear that does even IMF do their due diligence? I mean, we are already drawing in debt, but if our Kenyan government go to ask for debt, they'll still be given debt. What's their due diligence? Do they even ask, how much do you have? How do you plan to repay it? When are you repaying it? Or it's all on us as citizens. We have to bear the cost that we didn't even ask for. I pray to these honorable commissioners that you find that the IMF institution and the WorldBank should be dismantled. And we as Africans form our own institutions, a place where we can have our own voices heard, because these IMF and WorldBank were birthed in institutions where we did not even have a seat, have a say. We don't even have a vote in it.
You've heard from victim 1, victim 2, and victim 3. They've posed a lot of questions directed to IMF and World Bank on the basis of the policies and the implications their policies have had on their livelihoods. We would like some answers. And I want to start by asking you something. When I say Adam Smith, David Ricardo, John Milton Friedman, John Maynard Keynes, who are these people? Apart from them being men, who are they? Huh? Men. Western economists. These are the fathers of macroeconomic policy that has shaped the economic ordering of African economies. Who are our African economists sitting in the World Bank and the IMF designing policies for the African continent? I'd like to hear answers from somebody called Mary, who later has the audacity to come and cross-examine some of these victims and ourselves. We'll take that with her at a later stage. But honorable members of the Commission, let me begin on accusation number 4, which is an issue that touches on the impact, the design of the global financial system that has been engineered by IMF and World Bank. I'd want to start, honorable commissioners, to start by saying that the IMF and the World Bank have immunity. That is undisputed. But international law recognizes a fundamental principle that immunity cannot shield systematic violations of peremptory norms. Okay? So when institutions orchestrate what amounts to economic capture, and you've heard Kizito's statement on that earlier on, when they systematically violate the right to development, you've heard Ene speak about that, when they create conditions that breach the most fundamental human rights, and you heard Pembele speak about that, then their immunity dissolves. Do we agree? Let me be clear about the legal foundations that strip away the protective veil that IMF and World Bank claim for themselves. We cannot take us to court because we have sovereign immunity. That's the argument that makes. But today we are here to question IMF and World Bank policies, and we are here to link these towards the unjust exploitation of Africa and the unjust enrichment of Western nations, because that is what has resulted. You've heard from Wasonga's statement, right? There's inequality that has been brought about. So my first point in terms of addressing the legal issues before we begin is the violation of what in law we call the just cogence norms, yeah? The foundation of law itself. Now, just cogence means that there has to be a prohibition against racial discrimination. And that is a peremptory norm of international law. Nobody has the right to discriminate anybody. But when the IMF allocates 67% of special drawing rights to wealthy nations, and Africa receives 1% based on formulas that have been created when Africa was colonized, this constitutes systematic racial discrimination in resource allocation. So the questions about poverty is actually coming from the global financial system. And I would like Mary to respond to that as well, because she's going to question us. I have a right to question her. So no immunity protects institutionalized discrimination, whether exercised through political exclusion or economic subjugation. My second point on a legal issue is that the IMF and the World Bank have led to a systematic breach of the right to development. And I'll spend a bit of time here. In 1986, the UN Declaration, which was reinforced by the African Charter, Article 22, it establishes development as an inalienable human right. Now, when these institutions, IMF and World Bank, force African countries to pay $1.3 trillion in debt service, while the debt grows from $6 billion to $1.8 trillion over a period of years, when they demand or mandate policies that destroyed Nigeria's 350,000 textile jobs, they violate this fundamental right. Now, the European Court of Human Rights, in the case of Waite and Kennedy versus Germany, It established that international organizations' immunity is not absolute, because it must be balanced against fundamental rights, particularly when no alternative remedy exists. Today, if we want to question the IMF and the World Bank, where do we go? There is no alternative. And the case in the European Court says that that is a ground to waive immunity. So we have a legal opening here, commissioners. There's also the Special Court of Sierra Leone in the case of Prosecutor versus Taylor that further affirmed that immunity cannot shield those responsible for systematic violations of international law. And during our accusation number 3 with Kizito, we already established the various breaches of international human rights that have taken place as a result of the structural adjustment policies. The third legal issue here is that the IMF and the World Bank policies, particularly IMF's policies, in the way it's even designed the global financial system, generated austerity measures, brought about problems in the way we are having debt arrangements. It's actually a violation of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the ICESCR. Article 2.1 of this convention requires states to use maximum available resources for realizing these rights. Now, when IMF programs force countries to allocate 60% of revenue to debt service, while millions lack water, education, and health care, when unfair interest rates charges for Africa at 11.6%, while Germany pays 1.5%, these institutions then become complicit in breaching binding treaty obligations. Now, the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights has confirmed that international organizations must respect these rights in their operations. Have you not heard testimony today that has shown that these institutions have not respected human rights? Can I have a resounding yes? The fourth legal issue is on the principle of ultra-virus acts. Right? Ultra-virus simply means you've gone beyond your power, you've gone beyond your duty to do something you shouldn't have done. And we're saying that the IMF and the World Bank have acted ultra-virus. Now, the World Bank and IMF articles of agreement require them to promote development and stability. When their policies systematically deindustrialize entire continents, when they create debt traps rather than development pathways, they act beyond their legal mandate. And I don't have to give you a lot of examples, just the austerity measures are enough. Wasonga's statement on what happened in Kenya is substantially enough. And it was established, any acts outside institutional mandates therefore cannot claim immunity protection. That's the case of Waite and Kennedy versus Germany. So we are here legitimately, questioning the IMF and the World Bank on the policies that they have designed and holding them accountable that that design has fiscally disturbed the entire continent. Finally, before I call upon my witness, there's this emerging norm against economic subjugation. We're all talking about the SDGs. We're all talking about the Africa Union Agenda 2063. It's about economic liberalization, economic empowerment. But the way in which IMF policies have been designed, it has resulted in economic subjugation. And we've got UNCTAD, we've got the Africa Union Commission. They have provided us with cogent evidence that says 90 billion annually is lost because of illicit financial flows that is facilitated by imposed financial liberalization. Where is this financial liberalization coming from? From the structural adjustment programs and privatization policy of the IMF. 44% of African debt has shifted to private creditors through deliberate policy. Like I told you, IMF exists to counter decolonization. And you will hear from Honorable Shabalala how this is so. We're also seeing trade rules that destroyed African industries while protecting Western subsidies. Ghana, during colonization, was not allowed to grow potatoes, because the British at that time said Ghanaian potatoes are bad for human consumption. So they would import potatoes from England into Ghana. Then war broke out, and lo and behold, Now they were producing potatoes in Ghana because suddenly they became fit for human consumption. But then, when war ended, they basically said, oh, now you cannot go ahead and produce your potatoes. We have to start importing them from England. What does this do? It's a premature deindustrialization, which results in currency devaluation, which results in a country having to become dependent, what Kizito was telling us. This is all about systemic or systemic economic subjugation that has violated the UN Charter's principle on sovereign equality and the right of self-determination, because we clearly do not have it. And you're also going to hear, finally, our evidence that we've been presenting, that over the past 60 years, the IMF and the World Bank has created a global financial architecture that extracts more wealth than it provides. How dare you charge 11% to the continent in interest and 1.6% to Germany? Does that make logical sense? I mean, I don't know how Mary even has the audacity to stand here and question anything, but I mean, pardon me for, for misaligning myself here. Secondly, this GFS, the global financial system that has been created, it has destroyed more industries than it has created. Nigeria started off with about 175 factories, textile and garments, reduced to 20 in 10 years because of SAPs. What does that tell you about the global financial system, right? It is skewed against the proper, full decolonization of the continent. And these same global financial institutions have impoverished more people than it has empowered. And finally, it has entrenched more inequality than it has alleviated. So these are the legal issues that we have packaged in terms of establishing issue number 4 on questions around the global financial system. And I would now like to invite my expert witness, the Honorable Kanyesile Shabalala, to join us on the witness box and to lead evidence to demonstrate to you how this global financial system has undermined African development. Honorable, please join us. Honorable, before you begin, I'd like you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your educational and professional background.
Thank you so much. I thank the court for the opportunity. Whenever people say introduce yourself, I always wonder which one should I take. I'm a former member of parliament. I'm a retired admiral. I'm the first female admiral in South Africa, actually. Most people say first black female, no, first female, period. I have a doctorate. I'm an activist, so I've been around. I was in the bush during apartheid, so I'm a guerrilla too. So I have lived my life to see a protected economy and a liberalized economy according to the IMF and World Bank. I've been to, I think, 39 African countries now, and I can weigh and tell you the difference.
Thank you.
That's me.
Thank you very much. We have a great expert witness here who's actually been right involved in the IMF programs. So, Honorable, I'd like to start by a first question, right? Why are we really blaming IMF and the World Bank policies? Like, why are we saying African continent? Could you shed some light on that?
I think I love that question because it makes us realize that if we don't know our history, yesterday's killers become today's saviors. If you truly want to understand who the IMF and World Bank are, you need to go to Europe in the 1400s. That's just before the slave trade and colonization. Europe had just suffered for about 9 centuries, what they call the Dark Ages. I mean, collapse of civilization, period. And there was this 100 Years' War between Britain and France that also decimated Europe. And then they were coming into what they call Renaissance, which is a cultural revolution, really. That's a nice French word, but it means cultural revolution. So they needed what they called a place in the sun, meaning they needed people they could exploit economically so they could rebuild Europe. They came with what was called the East India companies. Now, I know most of us know the English, the Dutch, they were popular. Guess what? A country like Italy even had one, the Genoese, the Danish had one. People you don't think had those companies had them. But why were those companies important? Because they were chartered companies. My sister here, Leila, will know as a lawyer, if they are chartered companies, it means they are commissioned by the state. Most of them were given powers to even colonize where it was difficult to extract minerals and wealth from Africa. They were given colonial powers. What did European governments get out of it? Economic kickbacks. But these companies were also the conduit that transferred the wealth, tangible and monetary, from Africa to Europe. Why am I giving this example? Because Europe was in the same position in 1944. The Second World War had decimated infrastructure in Europe. Economies had fallen, unemployment was high, there was no inflation, it was hyperinflation. Europe was in a bad shape. They were back to 1400. So they knew that they need some way to protect themselves. But why did they need it if they still had colonies? They knew that the tide to decolonize was so high, Africans were rising and saying down with colonialism. So they knew, remember, Ghana was coming up in 1957. So they knew they cannot continue having a colonial presence that is visible in Africa. So they needed a sneaky way. They came up with the IMF and the World Bank. Remember, Leila said it before. When the World Bank was formed, it was never formed to champion economic progress for the globe. It was formed to rebuild Europe after the Second World War. That was its primary aim. The IMF, on the other hand, was formed to control the financial monetary system and the fiscal policy. Why? Because they had come up with a nice thing called neoliberalism or neo-colonization for us. In essence, what does that mean? It means we will give you independence, but we will make sure that your governments are nothing but a post office between us, capital, and the people. We will make sure that we force your governments to liberalize, which means open the economies very prematurely. And when you do that, it would mean, as Leila has correctly said, we are stopping your development. It's not written in black and white. That's not what we say we are doing. But the after effect of it is that which we are doing. So while the IMF and the World Bank are sitting quietly in some corner and no one protests against them, we don't point fingers at them, we swear at our governments, they're actually the cause of where we are. It's called macroeconomic policy. Macroeconomic policy are these policies that we have, and we'll give examples. I think I will shut up and give it back to you so that you can ask the next question. But a macroeconomic policy is the one that says, on paper, it says your economy is growing by 6%, but it does not translate to job creation, doesn't translate to bread on the table, doesn't translate to cutting unemployment. That's what the IMF and the World Bank have been championing in Africa. So for me, just to conclude, they are nothing but the East India chartered companies that were used during slavery and colonization. It's just that this time they are acceptable because they are coming in the form of the banking system.
So that's a very important point that you've raised for us, and I want to put it in the perspective of the macroeconomic policy that you've talked about, right? These institutions, what we call IMF and World Bank, represent the former colonial masters that have designed this fiscal order for ourselves and this economic governance within which we operate our economic activities. And on the basis of this, for them, what is important is meeting a balance of payments. Right? Your exports and your imports must match. So we import a lot, we export maybe a little, we have a deficit. That deficit pushes us to borrow from IMF and World Bank. So the two are the institutions that we call today the global financial system. My question to you would be, explain to the Commission and the concerned citizens today, how has this GFS undermined Africa? Give us direct examples.
I think before I get to the direct examples, the part I forgot to explain is the chartered companies in Europe in the 1400s operated under what was called mercantilism. That's what's given birth to mercantile law as a form of law for people who study law at university. Mercantilism essentially said Europe should export more and import less, meaning they are giving you what you need or even do not need, but they are taking from you what they want to take. They called it a balance of trade. Mercantilism also said stockpile gold and precious metals, which is what they did exactly. It also said exploit weaker economies for your own benefit. Is that not what the IMF and the World Bank are there to do? So I think the question you asked for me speaks to mercantilism. They just have given it different names. They called it neoliberalism, and then we woke up to it and we were smart and we started protesting. They gave it another nice name called globalization. Now it breaks my heart to hear an African tell me, oh, we are in the global system, and I often wonder which one. You were never even in the first industrial revolution. How are you in the fourth one? Be that as it may. Direct examples, Leila. You know, liberalization, I can talk about it as a person that lived under apartheid. The Afrikaner or National Party economy was a protectionist economy. In 1982, at the height of the boycott against the South African government, you know the rand to the dollar was 1-to-1, 1982. At most, it would dwindle to 1 rand 30 cents, but never more. When was the rand its weakest, if you ask Google? When 9/11 happened. How are we affected? We were in South Africa. They were fighting America. But it's because in 1994, when we took over, we allowed a system called liberalization. We ingrained ourselves into the dollarized economy. So whatever happens to America affects the dollar. Now, can you see the difference? Yes. Height of apartheid. South Africa was boycotted, even sport-wise. But because it was a protected economy, state intervention, the dollar and the rand were at par. For me, that's example one. Textile industry of South Africa. When I grew up in Soweto and I decided I'm playing truant, I'm not going to school, by 10 o'clock you'd wake up, stand at the gate of your home and look around and be like, nah, I'm just gonna shower and go to school. Because it is dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop. People have gone to school, people have gone to work. Today in Soweto, there's no difference between Sunday, Monday, Wednesday. It is the same. Because of high rate of unemployment, the township is the same. You can no longer tell days of the week. But look at our textile industry, Leila. Between 2005 and 2015, we lost 36% of jobs in the textile industry alone because we liberalized in 1994. In 2005, the textile industry contributed 6% to the GDP of the country. By 2021, it was contributing 0.7%, liberalization. That's advices of the IMF and the World Bank. And you asked, why are we blaming them? There's a part we forgot to highlight here. The IMF and World Bank annually do assessment of our economies. Remember, the IMF is in charge of the finance and the fiscal policies. So they look and they say, oh, we think your monetary system is doing this and this. We think your currency is doing this and this, which is how they are the ones who ask government to devalue currency. So when they write that report, if it is not favorable, if they say devalue currency and you say no, they write a report that's unfavorable, immediately you are deemed not suitable for investment. Because remember, we have dollarized the economies. So if you're not suitable for investment, it means you don't have foreign reserves. And if you don't have foreign reserves, you don't have people planting into your economy, it means there's no creation of jobs. Because remember, we've removed the state. We are privatizing, we removed the state. So we are relying on foreign companies primarily. So when that happens, it will follow with a UN report also, country report, which are done also every year. Then they will say, oh, not favorable, they red carpet you or red list you, which is where Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are currently. That's why it's hard to even spend CSO money there, because it will not be allowed. So we blame them because when they assess our economies and they give advice, Leila, they give advices that make sure that the protection of Western economies, Western as in America-led, followed by Western Europe, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. That's what we define as the West. They are there to make sure that those economies continue to survive at the back of the African economy. That's why we call it neo-colonialism, a new way of colonizing. Another example would be forced deindustrialization. You talked about it. And you gave the example, but I think I want it to hit home. Deindustrialization, and we say forced because we don't make these choices. Nigerian textile industry used to boast at least 200 textile mills, reduced to 20. It employed 500,000 workers. It's reduced to 20,000. You know, I was reading reports that say we shouldn't say it's destroyed, we should say it's extinct, because by 2030 it shall cease to exist. Those are people who used to make their own garments. We look at forced devaluation. We can't finish this talk without talking about forced devaluation, because we stand on the ground where the kwacha has been devalued to a point where you don't know if the kwacha is monopoly money or the kwacha is still money. No, for real. I know we laugh even when people have died because it's a self-coping mechanism, but it's actually sad because the IMF advised Malawi in 2012 to devalue the kwacha by 33%. Who does that? Who devalues a currency by 33% overnight? What's the after effect of a devalued currency? Goods become scarce, there's inflation, they become expensive, black market rises, there's racketeering. Who bears the brunt? The woman. You know, I selected specifically the textile industry to show the after effects of IMF and WorldBank policies on the African woman. When you devalue a currency by 33%, it is the Malawian woman who will suffer, because we live, sadly, in a patriarchal society where you could be 12 years of age and you have brothers who are 4, 5, 7 years older than you. When it's sunset, they look at the 12-year-old and they ask, what are we eating? So as a girl and as a woman, you will make a plan with that devalued kwacha of 33%. You will still have to get food from, I don't know, your breast, your hair, somehow you'll provide food.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just one last one. We thought that was the worst. Last year, they still asked Malawi to devalue the kwacha by 44%. Now where's the kwacha? That's why I said it's a point where you don't know if it's monopoly money or it's money. I don't even know how Malawians are surviving, truly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Honorable Commissioners, the point that has been made here, which is very relevant, is that there exists a global financial system. And through this global financial system, we are seeing contractual terms that are binding nations. And these contractual terms are subjugating nations. You've heard the empirical evidence that the Honorable Shabalala has presented to demonstrate how trade liberalization, forced deindustrialization, and the devaluation of currencies have pushed African economies to the brink at which they are. She has provided evidence from South Africa, and she's provided evidence from Malawi as well. We would submit that this empirical evidence be considered as the makings of the global financial system. My last question to you, Honorable, is that are there any alternatives, any alternative institutions, any alternative mechanisms that African countries can turn to without looking towards this global financial systems? If you could just respond to that and conclude with your main ask. What do you want the Commission today to establish for us? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. You know, if we are given a chance by IMF, World Bank, OECD, the cartel, the American Western-led cartel, to chart our own path, I could be able to answer you. Nkrumah tried. I mean, Nkrumah is the one that warned us not to go the IMF and World Bank route. How did he end up? In a coup. He was away in Asia. When he was couped, he died a lonely man. We have implemented collectively, Ghana included, as a continent actually, only 3% of Nkrumah's warnings to us and policies. And then we keep asking, what's the alternative? Let's read Nkrumah, the alternative is there. And then you look at Sankara. He tried an alternative. What happened to him? His back was riddled with bullets. Oh, the French Secret Service are now agreeing they were involved, which we knew anyway. We didn't need their confession. The CIA is involved. Riddled with bullets, buried in an unmarked grave while the wife and 2 kids had to escape. They couldn't even witness the burial. And then you look at Patrice Lumumba, you hate a man who does not want to be in the IMF and WorldBank system to a point where you melt the body in acid. Nothing was found of Patrice Lumumba except a nail, which even a Belgian officer took to make it a trophy. I mean, what is this ruthlessness? Are these people even human? Look at what happened to Jacob Zuma, people. Nationalist, standard 4 education.
3 minutes left.
But nationalist. The banks in South Africa, evidence has sufficed, they collaborated to devalue the rand between 2005 and 2013. Who's been dragged of these banks to court? You know how we stood in parliament, myself included, because I led the chart to tell him to pay back the money, and we insulted him and we did all sorts of things. None of these bank executives have suffered that, but they devalued the rand. If they don't want you, they will use this monetary system to punish you. Look at Zimbabwe. I'm told a quarter of the population is outside Zimbabwe, either as refugees plain or as economic refugees. For me, it's the same thing, because they should be in Zimbabwe growing the economy.
So,
why did that happen? Again, punishment of IMF and World Bank, sanctions. So it's hard to have an alternative, because the alternative dies in the cradle. It is never allowed to even crawl, let alone walk.
So what would be your ask?
What do I want from the Commission? I think personally as an African, I don't want the amendment and the reformation of the IMF and World Bank. I just want their total death. So I want the Commission... So I want us as Africans to truly start shouting death to the IMF and World Bank. It's pretty much like the Security Council. Why do we want representation there? It must die. Everybody must come to the General Assembly, where everybody has got one vote, one country. So that would be my response.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Honorable Commission. Honorable Commission, I'd just like to make one remark that Honorable Shabalala, in terms of demonstrating her empirical evidence, has clearly demonstrated that the current global financial system has violated the right to development. That's the finding we would like for you to make. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation and the issues you have put forward. Okay, now we'll move on to have the interested parties come to speak and put forth their own issues. And it's 10 minutes. So 10 minutes for each person. Please, interested parties. Do we have names? Just use the mic.
Josephine Banduhu, Janet Zou, and Mavuto Bamusi for the interested parties, correct?
Thank you very much, distinguished commissioners of this Commission of Inquiry, as well as the audience that is in here, distinguished Africans. My submission is in three parts. And let me begin as follows. In that Africa is under the hammer of what is called an economic hitman. Who is this economic hitman that is moving with a hammer all over our economies, all over Africa? And I will not mince words. I'll get straight to the point. We are talking about the IMF and the World Bank. They come as saviors. They come as institutions to redeem our economies. But at the end of the day, where are we?
Council, we are a commission of record. So if you could please introduce yourself, then you progress with your submission.
Thank you very much. I even forget to introduce myself because of the anger that is within me. Seriously, all of us must be angry, very, very angry, because of what the IMF and the World Bank has been doing to our countries and continue to do to us. My name is Mavuto Bamusi. I've been one of the founders of Malawi Economic Justice Network, and I've been in the civil society in Malawi for about 15 years or so. But I speak here as a bona fide representative of not only the people of Malawi, but of the people of this continent of Africa. So let me get back to my first submission, which is about how the economic hitman is moving around us. Of course, with a specific example of Malawi. In the 1980s, that is when Malawi embraced these so-called structural adjustment programs, SAPs. And in Chichewa, sometimes we translated this to Satana Alipano. Let me help the translators in the translation pool. It means that the devil is here. Satana means the devil. The devil is here. SAP, Satana Alipano, structural adjustment programs beginning in the years, the 1980s. Just like South Africa, Malawi too, the strength of the kwacha, Malawi's local currency, at some point was one Malawi kwacha to one, not dollar, but pound, British pound, 1 to 1. But then later on, as we move along this path in the 1980s, the devil comes, and your guess is as good as mine, because immediately, what we thought was going to be the entrenchment of development and the reduction of poverty was going to be a dream, just an illusion. But let me fast forward, because I only have got 10 minutes. In 1992, when Malawi went through a political transition, and that was also the time when many of our African countries were going through a political transition to embrace what is called multi-party politics or pluralism. At the same time, economic pluralism was also happening, and this I think is what we are now calling neoliberalism. And Malawi was forced to do a number of things. And I would like you to follow me in my submission, Honorable Judge, also, in that how have we been economically hit by this economic hitman, who was also very well, who has been very well explained by that particular author, John Perkins, and even in the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Malawi also went through a privatization process. So we had very vibrant industries, locally driven, locally generated, manufacturing all sorts of things within Malawi. The economic hitman...
You have used 5 minutes.
Thank you. The economic hitman demolished this structure. And between 1995 to 2005, 65 companies were privatized. And by the size of the economy of Malawi, that is not a small figure at all. And we were promised, Malawi was promised, just like many other countries, that through privatization, we are going to have a robust economy, we are going to create more jobs, there is going to be economic efficiency, and what have you. But today, I also would like to ask the audience in here, is there economic efficiency in Malawi today? Has poverty reduced in Malawi today? Have jobs been created in Malawi today? Are not many of our students who are graduating from universities languishing in the streets, spending so many years to get a job? Is that economic efficiency? Instead of being promised, given the promised land, the IMF and the World Bank have promised us a lie. They have sold us a lie. And later on, they also started forcing, literally at gunpoint, forcing our governments not to subsidize. Yet, through agricultural subsidies, we think that this would be one of the ways to end hunger. But in 2006, the IMF literally wrote Malawi government and said, if you want to do agricultural subsidies, use your own money. We are not going to provide you with any aid at all. Luckily, we had a bold, strong, and courageous president at the time, being Mutharika, who went on to defy. He defied the IMF and the World Bank and said, I am going to do this as long as if it benefits my own people. That is the kind of courage which all of us must move with. I submit, Honorable Judge and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that this is the time when we must be bold and say no to the IMF, say no to the impoverishing World Bank policies, like recruitment freezes. In the early 2000s, we saw many health workers, nurses, relocating to work in the United Kingdom. Because there were moratoriums here in Malawi, the government could not recruit any more nurses and so on and so forth. They could not provide increments in terms of their salaries because the IMF simply said, we have instituted a wage cap. You cannot spend money in your wage bill beyond this particular level. So there we were. But today, as I speak and as I'm about to conclude, the economic hitman is still around with us. And I would like to vouch, and I would like to challenge you in that if you think that there is no corruption in the World Bank, then that is a lie. Because while they preach the message of anti-corruption in our countries, we know that there is serious corruption happening there. Colleagues from Lesotho and South Africa, you are going to agree with me that
you have 1 minute left.
Thank you very much. When the Lesotho Highlands Dam was being constructed in Lesotho to supply water in Johannesburg, there was serious corruption which involved World Bank officials. Some of them were dismissed. So these are institutions that are hypocritical in nature. So finally, I would like to submit, and before I do that, let me just borrow some 30 seconds only, in that the IMF and the World Bank have connived with some of our own people. They are conniving with some of our own businesses. If you look at the commercial banks in Malawi, there are some of the most profitable institutions in this country. The banks are profiting huge profits on an annual basis. Where are the profits coming from? It is because they are lending money to the government, because the government is in serious debt, there are deficits, and so the government has got nowhere to go. It has to go to the banks to borrow money. Out of this borrowing, the banks are making huge profits. I think, and I submit, Honorable Judge, that this is part of the conniving which is there between the international finance institutions and other business actors. In conclusion, I submit that the IMF has paraded failed policies. The World Bank is presiding over fake and failed policies, including the WTO. We are not mentioning the WTO, the World Trade Organization, failed agreements, and these are leading to failed development and the failure of poverty reduction processes in Malawi. Therefore, we need to agree to abolish the World Bank, abolish the International Monetary Fund. For this to happen, you need to be courageous. One man with courage is a majority, and one woman with courage is an absolute majority. With courage, we can abolish and do away with the IMF and the World Bank. I submit, Honorable Judge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mavuto. Janet, you have 10 minutes. Is Janet here? Oh, great. Josephine? Josephine, you have the floor, 10 minutes.
Je rappelle à l'Assemblée que je parle français puisque je viens de la République démocratique du Congo, un pays francophone. Et avant toute chose, j'aimerais aussi solliciter votre indulgence, chers membres de la Commission, parce que j'ai un petit souci de la santé. Je suis en train de perdre ma voix de temps en temps. Ceux qui me connaissent savent que je ne parle pas comme ça. Honorables membres du tribunal, je vous remercie pour la parole. Je me tiens devant vous, non pas comme juriste ou technicienne de la dette, mais comme témoin direct et analyste engagé pour dénoncer les effets profondément destructeurs de politiques imposées à la République démocratique du Congo par les Fonds monétaires internationaux. Et ce que je veux partager est un mélange de vécu personnel, d'observation professionnelle et de témoignages collectifs, car derrière le chiffre de la dette, il y a des vies et des vies des milliers de Congolais. Pour mieux comprendre ce que vit le citoyen moyen congolais, il faut d'abord revenir à la racine du problème. Les politiques imposées par les Fonds monétaires internationaux à la République démocratique du Congo depuis plus de 40 ans. Nous sommes là dans les années 1980. La République démocratique du Congo a été soumise à plusieurs programmes d'ajustement structurel dictés par les Fonds monétaires internationaux, autrement les FMI. Et ces programmes exigent la réduction drastique des dépenses publiques, mais également la libéralisation de marchés et l'augmentation des taxes indirectes comme la TVA. Cela a eu comme conséquence humaine la détérioration de services de santé. Le Congo est aujourd'hui un pays où on retrouve des hôpitaux sans gants, sans oxygène, sans espoir. Vous trouverez également le personnel médical sous-payé, l'accès réduit aux soins pour les populations rurales et urbaines. Je ne reviendrai pas sur ça, ma consoeur Lydie, lorsqu'elle est passée ici, elle a évoqué cela et ça a même coûté la vie à son papa ou à son père, tout le monde a suivi. Il y a également comme conséquence l'effondrement du système éducatif public. Si vous venez au Congo, vous trouverez qu'il y a des dizaines ou mieux de centaines des écoles abandonnées où il n'y a pas de bancs, pas un seul banc, où il n'y a même pas de tableau, ni de craie pour écrire. Dans mon pays, les frais scolaires sont devenus inaccessibles car très coûteux. Il y a aussi la baisse de qualité de l'enseignement. Et moi qui vous parle aujourd'hui, j'ai grandi dans cette crise. Orpheline de père, j'ai été élevée par une maman ou une mère seule et sans moyens. Et ma scolarité a été un combat, un véritable parcours de combattants. Je me faisais chasser de l'école pour non-paiement, et c'est là de l'école primaire jusqu'à l'université. Je n'ai jamais fait toute une année scolaire ou académique sans être chassé ou être chassé moins de 10 fois. Imaginez toute une vie en train d'être chassé de l'école parce qu'il n'y avait pas de moyens. Et n'eût été l'amour, ce souci d'étudier que j'avais, ni la persévérance, je ne serais pas devant vous aujourd'hui. Je serais peut-être en ce moment dans un marché en train de vendre des légumes, une analphabète qui ne sait ni écrire son nom, ni décrire sa personne et ne sait rien faire. Donc comprenez un peu ce qui se passe dans mon pays. Une autre conséquence de restriction du FMI, il y a la précarisation de travailleurs et travailleuses, la privatisation massive et gel des recrutements dans le secteur public, entraînant chômage et perte de sécurité sociale. Moi qui vous parle, je reviens encore sur mon histoire. Je suis journaliste à la télévision nationale de la République démocratique du Congo. Et donc, je suis fonctionnaire de l'État. Ça, c'est dans les faits que je suis fonctionnaire de l'État. Mais dans la vie réelle,
5 minutes left.
je suis travailleuse, yes, ok, pauvre. Je suis une travailleuse pauvre. Parce que j'ai un salaire qui ne représente rien. Je ne peux pas nouer le 2 bouts du mois avec mon salaire. Je n'ai pas d'allocation familiale. Je n'ai pas de prime. Je n'ai pas de transport pour me rendre au travail. Je n'ai pas non plus de sécurité médicale. Combien de fois j'ai failli mourir parce qu'une perfusion coûtait cher ou parce qu'un produit prescrit par un médecin n'était pas à ma bourse, ou encore j'ai été obligée de recourir à l'automédication. Donc on se soigne à la maison sans connaître le vrai diagnostic, sans connaître la maladie ou le problème qu'on a. Alors, c'est avec risque et péril. Ces restrictions du FMI ont aussi imposé la fiscalité injuste, hausse de la TVA, d'autres impôts indirects frappant plus directement le pauvre que les riches. Et derrière tout cela, il y a une question de justice. Ces politiques violent ouvertement les droits humains fondamentaux. Les conditions imposées par le FMI ne tiennent aucunement compte des obligations fondamentales de l'État congolais en matière de droits économiques et sociaux tels que garantis par la Constitution nationale et les conventions internationales. Il y a la Charte africaine des droits de l'homme et du peuple. Les violations constatées sont entre autres l'atteinte au droit à la santé, l'atteinte au droit à un niveau de vie décent, l'absence d'évaluation préalable des impacts sur les droits humains. Et le peuple congolais, pour couronner le tout, n'a jamais été véritablement consulté ni représenté dans les négociations de ce programme d'endettement. Les décisions sont prises entre technocrates de Washington et les élites locales, souvent corrompues.
3 minutes left.
Thank you. Et déconnectées des réalités de la majorité. Cela constitue une violation flagrante du droit du peuple à disposer d'eux-mêmes. Là, je suis dans l'article 20. C'est pourquoi, en tant que citoyenne et partie intéressée, je me permets de formuler des requêtes suivantes. Au nom de mon peuple, je demande donc à la Commission de reconnaître les politiques du Fonds monétaire international en République démocratique du Congo comme une forme de violence économique systémique, je voulais dire. Établir la responsabilité morale et politique du FMI et des élites nationales complices dans la dégradation des conditions de vie en RDC et aussi à appeler à un audit citoyen de la dette et à la restitution de ressources pillées sous couverture de la dette. Soutenir une transition vers une politique économique fondée sur les droits humains, la justice sociale et la souveraineté populaire. Je voudrais conclure en rappelant que c'est le FMI. Je voudrais conclure en rappelant que ce que le FMI appel réforme, c'est pour notre peuple ou nous citoyens des condamnations à la misère. Ces politiques ont appauvri nos familles, affaibli nos hôpitaux et tuent l'espoir de millions d'enfants d'avoir un avenir digne. Ce système n'est pas une erreur, c'est un modèle qu'il faut démanteler, pas ajuster. Au nom de la justice, nous demandons que cela cesse. Nous ne voulons plus survivre, nous voulons vivre, décider et exister pleinement. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Josephine. Thank you. You're from Congo, so maybe Asante will also be African. Thank you for your submission. I'm told Janet is here. Janet, can you make it 8 minutes? Awesome.
Good afternoon, Honorable Commissioners. And I would like to thank the Honorable Commission of Inquiry for having me here as an interested party, particularly on accusation 2, on austerity. And I come in as an interested party based on my own story, growing up during the structural adjustment programs implemented in Zimbabwe. I come from Zimbabwe. And one day I woke up and I was facing an issue of dropout from school because my father was retrenched. I was a girl and there was myself and my brother that I come after. And a decision had to be made in terms of the schools that we will attend, or even if we will be able to attend. I only managed to continue because of the social dimension fund that was being provided for by the government. Were it not that, I would not be able to even stand in august houses and before a commission, honorable commission like this one. I would have married very young, probably. I would be a domestic worker, probably. But all that was shifted by the social dimension fund that I had access to. I was one of the lucky ones, actually, because it can never be enough. There are so many thousands and millions of young girls who would depend on it. So, honorable members of this Commission of Inquiry, I appear therefore today to speak on behalf of the women and girls from across Southern Africa, as a Pan-African feminist, as an activist in the economic justice space for over 15 years, and then my own personal story that I have shared with you. I stand here for those whose invisible labor sustains households, communities, and economies, but whose lives are increasingly burdened by the consequences of austerity. We are here to confront an injustice that is both systemic and intimate, very close, wearing a face, and usually a female and a girl's face. The growing burden of unpaid care work, intensified by budget cuts in public services that are imposed under the guise of fiscal discipline. And all across the issues that have been presented here, it cuts across. Today, I would like to ask the tribunal to recognize the gendered violence of austerity and to consider the following, honorable commissioners. That the IMF and the WorldBank's austerity conditionalities deepen unpaid care burdens on women and girls by undermining public health care, education, welfare, and welfare infrastructure. That this constitutes a violation of fundamental human rights, including the right to health, education, development, and protection from discrimination as enshrined in various protocols and international conventions, such as the ICESR, CEDAW, and the African Charter. That this commission acknowledges the injustice as structural and recommends reparative economic alternatives that center care, equity, and feminist justice.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I have a bit of evidence from a research that we just concluded in 5 Southern African countries that includes South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, and Mozambique. In Malawi, the IMF imposed wage caps, blocked the recruitment of essential health workers between 2016 and 2021, even during disease outbreaks. Women in rural communities had no choice but to absorb these deficits by caring for the sick without pay, supplies, or support. And the care economy is not just informal, it is exploited because of these austerity measures. All across the 5 countries that we carried out this research, care responsibilities sharply increase when public services are cut, particularly under debt-related fiscal pressures, and we heard from the other issue around debt that was presented. We are happy to share with the Commission the research findings that we got that are substantiated by the people that we met on the ground who shared their different stories from Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Mozambique. The examples that we have directly reinforce accusation 3, Honorable Commissioners, which rightly asserts that international financial institutions-driven structural adjustment policies have eroded access to public services, health, education, water, and transferred the cost of survival to women's unpaid care work. But this does not stop there as well as you make your considerations, the Honorable Commission. The harm is also worsened by the complicity of the African governments. Many have failed to challenge the austerity prescriptions. They continue to prioritize debt repayments over investment in care systems. In doing so, they accept the logic that fiscal discipline
3 minutes left.
Thank you. They accept that the logic that fiscal discipline matters more than people's dignity. And once again, it is the poor women who suffer. As I conclude, I have some questions, Honorable Commissioners. Will this Commission of Inquiry, therefore, with all the witnesses that have come here and the victims that have been here, affirm that austerity is not gender neutral? Will it recognize the harm that has been done to women and girls through shrinking public goods and expanding of the unpaid care? Will it call out not only the global institutions that impose harm, but also the African governments that enable it by failing to protect their people? And finally, will this Commission of Inquiry recommend that care work as well be placed at the center of debt justice and macroeconomic policy reforms? Because until we do, Africa's development will rest on the backs of women, unseen, unaccounted, and unpaid. I thank you, Honorable Commissioners.
Thank you very much, Janet. I hope you'll avail your research to the Commission when we retreat. African people, I hope you still have some energy, levels that are left. Yes? For anybody who is feeling strained, we could rise up and stretch for a minute, because we have somebody who believes that the issues and the complaints that have been brought before the Commission of Inquiry are misplaced. And so they will be interrogating the victims and witnesses that have just appeared before the Commission. But before we do that, if we could all rise for a minute. Let's go all the way to Mount Kilimanjaro. Okay? All the way down, and we are now at the bottom of Zambezi Falls. Are we there? Okay, let's try and build a railway from Dakar to Kismayu. Stretch completely. It's a very fast railway. We could go forward to Egypt, or is it Chad? Yeah? And all the way down, is it to Johannesburg or to Soweto? To Angola? Okay, are we better? Yeah, we may take our seats. Council Mary is here to help critique some of the arguments that have been put forward by the councils who had prepared on all the 4 issues, and will lead in interrogating the witnesses. I noticed some of them have left. We start with Emmanuel. Councillor Leila, maybe you can guide me on who takes the stand at any given moment.
Oh, it's working now, okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, honorable commissioners, for this commission of inquiry, the members of inquiry, advocates of justice, interested parties, and councils that presented the issues against the IMF. I have enjoyed the session thus far. I am now going to be poking holes and challenging the witnesses that made their various statements. And ultimately, the aim is to help us to really think through the critical issues that have been raised. In my present capacity today, I will be representing the IMF and countering the statements that have been made. But ultimately, I want us to think of this as an opportunity to really refine and sharpen our arguments when considering doing something as significant as challenging these global financial institutions. Now, I'm going to copy...
Sorry, quick one, Council. You'll have 7 minutes per witness. Okay. 7.
So, I'm going to copy a mentor, a good friend. She always starts with an African proverb. And the African proverb that I would like to start with is in Swahili. It says, Nyani haoni kundule. And what that means for those of you that are not Swahili speakers is that a monkey does not see his behind. And ultimately, through the questions that I will pose, I will try to make the case for us as a continent to take responsibility, to be accountable, to change the way we see things and how we respond to issues. I have a set of questions for the witnesses. I'm trying to look through the room and I'm not quite sure if I can see. Oh, okay. All right. So the first question that I had really was about corruption. We can point fingers and say the IMF has done this, the World Bank has done that. However, what happens when we take a step back and look at the role corruption has had to play in our indebtedness? And when I ask that, I would like to highlight the examples of countries that have Eurobonds. They borrowed money under the guise of using it for infrastructural development. The payment date came, they had nothing, and they had nothing to show for the monies that they had borrowed. My question is, where did the IMF come in? Did they put a gun to our heads when we were electing our representatives in government? So that is the first question for the first witness. I have a couple of other questions for the other witnesses, so I'm just going to go one by one. And I had just one question for the first witness, because they did mention the issue of, you know, we cannot go to school, there are no hospitals, or not enough, not well staffed, not well equipped, etc. So that is my first question, and I'll hand over to the respondent, to the witness.
Ok, muito obrigado, honorável Presidente da Comissão, e também a todos que estão aqui presentes. A pergunta que me foi colocada é uma pergunta muito pertinente. Digo pertinente porque ele nos leva a compreender exatamente as falhas de governos africanos a se envolver nesta questão. A pergunta está sobre a questão da corrupção. Se FMI, nessa questão, onde está a questão da corrupção que leva a maioria parte deste dinheiro, e também se há uma pistola que foram colocado no sentido que aceitasse esta dívida. Ora bem, pela experiência que nós temos, entendemos que muitos governos africanos não vê o dinheiro pelo qual eles assinam. Isto porque, logo que uma dívida é contratada, na verdade, a grande dificuldade que nós temos como africano é sabermos ler os contratos, sabermos analisar os contratos e também saber valorizar aqueles que são os nossos próprios recursos humanos. A maioria parte da dívida, que podemos dizer, dependendo de como os nossos governos contratam esta dívida. Há dívida praticamente bilateral e há dívida unilateral. Sobretudo, dívida unilateral, essa avança na questão da flutuação ou depende praticamente do câmbio flutuante. E essas dívidas levam cada vez mais os nossos países a uma taxa elevada. Mas o que acontece? A FMI, ao propor, no caso de Angola, FMI, primeiramente, concede a primeira parte da dívida considerada dívida experimental. E essa dívida não tem caráter de reembolso, uma dívida de preparação do terreno. E nós tratamos aquilo como se fosse uma armadilha. Muitos de nós fomos às matas preparar tirar ratos. Quem trata de armadilhas sabe que primeiramente alimenta o rato. Depois do rato entender que este lugar tem alimento, é que depois coloca a armadilha.
5 minutes left.
Okay. Como é que essas coisas acontecem? Praticamente, o dinheiro pelo qual é emprestado aos países, ele começa na questão de introduzir, vamos supor, na questão de recursos humanos. O que será os recursos humanos? Se no país onde contratar a dívida praticamente tiverem a questão ligada aos recursos humanos, a maioria parte de mão de obra barata virá dos países de onde que são os próprios credores. E o país vai, por entanto, beneficiar de uma pequena coisa. A segunda coisa tem a ver com o modelo pelo qual esse dinheiro é entregue aos países. É entregue através dos meios, é entregue através das pessoas, mas, em contrapartida, os países têm que abdicar ou ser penhorado recursos minerais. No caso de Angola, exemplo, hoje temos 60% da empresa diamantífera quase já não pertence a Angola, 93% da empresa petrolífera não pertence a Angola. Angola vende o petróleo bruto e compra o petróleo refinado. A FMI não impõe, mas as políticas pelo quais que impõe na questão de estruturar os nossos países leva exatamente a política do nosso país de uma maneira muito fraca e acabamos por não beneficiar nada do ponto de vista dos empréstimos que nós temos recebido e depois acarretarmos cada vez mais na questão de pagamento da dívida. Ok? Acarretado na questão de pagamento de dívida. Esta dívida, exemplo, Angola, primeira vez emprestou, durante a Covid lhe forneceram material, depois foi imposta de novo outra dívida, nesse preciso momento tem que pagar cerca de 70%. E os angolanos estão com dificuldade no que diz respeito ao pagamento dessa dívida, se não hipotecar todo tipo de recursos e privatizar exatamente as instituições. O maior problema, em resumo, são as políticas impostas e as decisões pelas quais são tomadas no topo sem a participação do governo local e não consegue participar essas decisões que venham a beneficiar o seu próprio povo, senão decisões para satisfazer o credor. Obrigado.
Thank you so much for that elaborate response. I had just the one question for you.
Yes.
So then maybe I can pose the next questions to the next witness. I believe it was Madame Ene.
Please. Yes, it's from the commission, the commissioners. Yes, before we continue, if I understood the question very well, it's very key to our deliberations because you said it clearly. What is our own responsibility in terms of corruption? Which means what can we do to bring down the levels of corruption that makes us to misallocate the loans to us? But if I can understand him very well, he was talking about the technicalities of receiving the loan and deploying it, which is a different issue. Because, like you said, if the World Bank and the IMF tell us that, oh, we'll give you people money, but due to corruptions, your corrupt practices, your corrupt ways of doing things, this body gets missing. Now, we're in this commission. What ideas do we have to address that issue of corruption? It's very basic in our societies, which means that there is no proper administration of the loans, there is no openness, there is no accountability, and that a few people just keep the loans in secrecy, but will keep on paying these high rates of the loan. So what can we do? What proposals do we have to that issue? It's very, very fundamental, because it's a very good defense of IMF and the World Bank. So he has tried to answer. Maybe somebody might have a better answer for us, and we'll move ahead, because we have to put this into our commission report. What proposals do we have to fight against corruption? It's a big thing in Africa. So
I think if I can sort of add to that, I moved on just because of the time, but if we have maybe 1 or 2 minutes, we can talk a little bit more. I don't know if any... sorry, I don't know if you have a response? Yes, okay.
Ok, obrigado. Para questões de medidas ou estratégias para a combate à corrupção ou a boa gestão da dívida, em primeiro lugar, o dinheiro deve ser alocado de acordo com os objetivos pelos quais o dinheiro é contratado ou é contraído. O primeiro objetivo que nós temos pressionado o governo é que a dívida pública tem que ser usada como elemento para a criação de novas economias, significa financiando a industrialização do país e criando estruturas locais de controle financeiro, estruturas eficazes, capazes de ter um controle financeiro transparente, e isto ajuda nessa questão, mas durante a contratação é preciso o envolvimento dos governos locais, inclusive comissões que podemos tratar como comissões multissectorial, onde pode existir estruturas de governo, estruturas partidárias, estruturas ligadas à sociedade civil, até certas estruturas comunitárias, por exemplo, a questão de plataformas, que trata da dívida, fazendo parte dessas comissões na questão de assinaturas de contrato, creio que não estaríamos em condições para alocarmos os fundos no seu devido local. E, por último, o uso desses fundos devem ser cada vez mais acompanhadas, e em cada momento tem que existir uma avaliação interna do país de como é que os fundos foram alocados, e que depois esperaremos a avaliação externa. A avaliação externa, ao vir se eles entram em corrupção com o país, nunca vai nos dar benefício. Mas a avaliação que dará-nos benefício tem que ser a avaliação interna, feita pelos próprios peritos do país, que têm como base dos objetivos pelo qual a dívida foi contratada e que acompanharam o uso do mesmo dinheiro, e, sobretudo, mostrar evidências físicas de como é que esse dinheiro foi usado a nível das infraestruturas sociais, econômicas e sucessivamente.
Thank you so much for that response, and I think it sort of takes us back to what I said initially. A monkey does not see its behind, and unless we figure out a solution to our domestic problems, then we wouldn't go anywhere. I think Dr. Laila has a...
To the commissioners, I'd like to respond a little bit on the corruption issue. I think it's really fundamental. And like you say, the monkey cannot see its behind, but surely if somebody puts a mirror, it will be able to see it. And that's the job of the IMF. Under Article 4 of the IMF Articles of Agreement, they basically conduct governance assessments. And as part of the governance assessment, there's a requirement that they ask states to commit to anti-corruption as a conditionality. So the problem here is that they do have the substantive governance framework for this, but when it comes to monitoring and enforcement, it's very weak. It is actually not properly monitored, and it is weakly enforced. And the best example is the Mozambique's hidden scandal, the hidden loan scandal that took place. We know where the money went. We know the members of government that were involved in it. But the funny thing is, because this was very public, IMF was also involved, was not involved, but they were aware about how the corruption that took place within Mozambique in terms of the hidden loans. Yet IMF is the one that bailed out the same government by coming up with a new program for them. So that is IMF in itself contradicting Article 4 of its governance assessment. That shows that they get countries to under economic duress to come up with different sort of conditionalities, and then corruption doesn't become a huge criteria for them. So that is a fundamental flaw, right? It's a sterile argument. Thank you.
Thanks, Laila. I think that sort of takes us to the next witness. It was Ms. Eni. So the first, I'll just ask all three questions and then you can respond. Or should I do one at a go? I'll go one at a go. Okay. So the first question is, there's been a lot of criticism all morning and sort of halfway through the afternoon about how the IMF and the World Bank operate and how that contributes to serious indebtedness. And I just wanted to ask, or rather to bring to light the fact that both the World Bank and the IMF pair budget support with technical assistance. Now, that means that they're not just coming in and giving you money. There is support on how to restructure your economy and move to being to reducing indebtedness. So that's the first thing I wanted you to sort of make a general comment on. I know a lot of the narrative has been that, oh, okay, all they're telling us to do is devalue our currencies. They're telling us, oh, we need to privatize, we need to open our economies, etc. But for me, I just wanted to sort of highlight what do you feel what do you feel the gaps are in that regard? Because they do provide technical assistance and they're not just giving you free money, which is fantastic. I know Honorable Shabalala said that, look, this is just an opportunity for them to sort of continue that cycle of debt for indebted countries. But my question is, you know, what then?
Thank you very much for the question. I also want to contribute to the issue of corruption, you know, the issue of corruption in the system, because for some time I was an anti-corruption teacher, or I don't know, you know, and I did the tour of the African countries, you know, going to so many governments, you know, and also working with the civil society. And there is a UN Convention on Anti-Corruption. That convention was brought down to the African level, which is to the AU level. African Union have their own conventions, but all of these conventions are not functional because it seems to have been a demand by someone that you have to meet up with some level of responsibility or before your government. And so the issue of corruption has become endemic. When we're talking about privatization, I want to just take us back to a little when we're talking of Ghana and the cocoa. Nigeria had 4 refineries. Nigeria has oil, a lot of oil. But it's not good enough because IMF came and said you must privatize. All of the refineries died. And then Nigerian crude oil is being taken out of the country and brought back, and then the refined products are brought back, and the poor pay for it. Where is the sense? In international law, there is what you call the slush fund, which is allowed. And so, you know, when you go deeper into foreign policies, you find out that they can actually use this money. Slush fund is allowed. Where there is trouble anywhere, you find out that they will use their own legal money to quench that, and they move ahead and continue to embalm. So I'll leave that there. And so the issue of corruption of our leaders is really terrible. The leader of Nigeria today, the president of Nigeria today, I think he has borrowed more money than the past government, past president has borrowed in 8 years. He has borrowed in less than 2 years. And so the IMF is sitting there. And I'm happy that you are asking this question. Let's not just focus only on when you are giving the money. If IMF tells you that they are giving you 500 million.
5 minutes left.
Okay. 500 million. What, in essence, they may be giving you only 300 million. And this has happened. I was involved in a negotiation, but I was told it was a grant. You know, during an anti-malaria, I was in public health for about 10 years. And we were designing this program, and we were told that the budget was for 100 million. It came from, then there was no WorldBank in Nigeria. The mission came from New York. After we finished planning for $100 million, we went to the Ministry of Health when we were now presenting what we have done. Somebody from the planning department asked, he said, how much is the money? I heard 180 million. And I'm like, am I hearing, or is somebody trying to confuse me? And then a few days later, we had a meeting with the minister, and I was told that the money is $280 million. So the only money that is coming to you is just 100 million. They are using the rest for management. They call it management fees. So what is happening? We need to open our eyes. The same thing happened last year. They were going to give Nigerian government, money for women, 500 million, and what we were told is that the management fee was going to be 200 million. The rest is history. What I'm asking is that the money that is being taken, when we are looking at that, IMF is not giving you money that will develop you. They will never give you the money that will develop you. They are giving money that will further impoverish. And what we are saying is total cancellation of the debts. They have taken enough money
3 minutes left.
from us. And so now we say, cancel all the debts, give us grants and not loans. And these are the uniqueness of what we're talking about. And so they come in silently. Now they have embedded themselves. They never had offices in African countries. They have embedded themselves and they are giving more loans because they have money and they need to give. I want to say one more thing. I want to bring out the issue of the airlines. For me as a Nigerian, to come into Malawi, I spent about 29 hours. From one airport to another, from another airport to another. What happened? What happened to Zimbabwe Airline, Zim Airways? What happened to the other airlines, Ghana Airways, Nigerian Airways, all of the airways? It was structural adjustment that destroyed them. I just want to remind you. Traveling to Brazil, I have to travel from Nigeria to Dubai. From Dubai, then I'll fly like 14 hours, 45 minutes to go to Brazil. And come back with 14 hours, 45 minutes to Dubai. And then fly 8 hours back to Nigeria. This is an 8-hour flight from Brazil to Nigeria. I just want to let you know so that we can see, that all of the things that we're talking about, we need to take. But I do agree that we need to take responsibility. And the responsibility is the gullibility of our leaders. African leaders, I don't know what they are doing because they seem not to know that you are not carrying anything out of this world. Not even the clothes you are wearing can you take from the world. But the primitive accumulation of wealth, the stealing of our wealth, the looting of the treasury of Africa. Yet, Africa is still the richest continent in the world right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think Laila had a comment, just keeping in mind I had 2 other questions for Ene, and I think...
Switch off yours. Thank you very much. With the permission of the commissioners, I'd like to respond to Mary's question, which is very important. She says that the IMF and the World Bank do provide budget support and technical assistance, which how wonderful an old colonial institution would be so benign to be able to, extract not only from the continent, but say, hey, I'll give you budget support and I'm going to give you technical assistance. But members of the commissioners, the issue here is that technical assistance comes with conditions. And the conditions would be, for example, align your fiscal policy with that of the OECD, align your fiscal policy with the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and also TRIPS. And what do these institutions demand? They demand that trade barriers be lifted. They demand that tariffs be removed. What does this do to the African economy? And then we're taking away protective measures. So this technical assistance also has implications. And also, the technical assistance that is provided is actually dictating macroeconomic policy frameworks to be introduced onto the continent. And earlier on, I mentioned the white male names, right, whose economic policy is what we're designing the continent's economic structure on the basis of that. And these macroeconomic frameworks, they include austerity, which today they call it with a beautiful word, fiscal consolidation. Okay? And then it's also coming up with issues to do with privatization and also deregulation of our markets to attract foreign capital. So in as much as we're getting the budget support and the technical assistance, indirectly we're bringing about austerity, privatization, deregulation, which then means these technical assistance is about protecting creditor repayment and pushing away a move towards progressive realization for socio-economic rights. So that is the issue, honorable commissioners.
Thank you so much, Laila, for that. I think I'd like to sort of follow up with 2 sort of questions to piggyback on what you've said and what Ms. Ene said. I think the first one is there are stories of countries that have done well, okay? And so we're looking at Cote d'Ivoire, at some point got IMF-supported reforms, and their GDP grew 3 times. We're looking at stories like Rwanda, who has experienced growth at levels upwards of 7.2% between 2010 and 2020. We're looking at countries like Greece. So Greece is not an African country, but that notwithstanding, they had serious problems with debt. And now, finally, their economy looks like it's turning around. So what would you say? And that's why I keep saying we need to bring it back and look inwards and get our house in order and decide the way forward. Another comment is that if you look at, talking about the economists, there were the 4 economists, isn't it? This is in the tax space, and then of course IMF, WorldBank were created, Bretton Woods institutions, etc. And I think another thing to think about is that we can no longer sit down and say, we don't know what to do. We don't have expertise. We don't have experience. We have PhDs in the room, several, right? You can't tell me that we don't have our own economists. Another thing is that there is a wave globally when it comes to international tax cooperation where we are saying that no, as African countries, we are not rule takers, we are going to be the rule makers. And like I said initially, I am here to sort of jog your thinking, to start saying that we need to sit down as a continent, find a way and forums to bring up the issues that we are raising here and saying, look, this is not working for us, and this is why it's not working for us. And we will not take anything less than reform. I had 2 other quick questions. I don't know if there's time.
I am not sure unless we close with Madam Ene.
Oh, no,
unless,
I have many other questions.
Sorry, it will have to be 1 question per person in the interest of time, because we must listen to the closing submissions.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Madam Ene. I think I'll leave it at that. I think the next person, I had a question.
And then Mary, go straight. You're the one who is leading us in prosecuting the other, what the alternatives.
Yeah.
Go straight to the question, and as counsel, not as teacher.
Okay.
Thank you.
Am I done?
So the next, sorry.
Am I done?
Yes, you're done.
Sorry, can I just say something? I just want to say that the technical assistance that we're talking about is your money that is for the technical assistance. You are paying for every loan that they give. There is already that money embedded. I just want to talk about an experience with the World Bank. During COVID times, the country director of World Bank, I issued a statement because we heard that Nigeria was going to take some loans. And we kicked against it. When we did that, the World Bank invited me, then I was the country director of ActionAid, and invited me for a meeting, and I was wondering why World Bank, because they know how I feel about them, and I had the right to feel that about them, because all of these policies were things that some of my colleagues died when I was a student, while we are struggling against the structural adjustment program. And so he called, and we went for the meeting, and no, they came. It was an online meeting during COVID. And he said, Ene, you know, you had a press release. He went round and round until he came to the press release. I said, yes. And I said, if they dare, we were going to go on a protest. And then he said, I think this is the best time to rise the fuel prices and also the energy hike. The World Bank was the one that stood on Nigeria and said, so the whole thing is not over. They are moving and further subjugating, and they are still bringing in more measures. And I looked at the guy, I know the country you come from. If at a time like this, during COVID that had further impoverished people, you want to increase fuel hike, they said remove fuel subsidies. I said, in my country, we produce oil. But our refineries are not working. Our young people, I can tell you, there are so many young people who are ready to marry in Africa, because Africa has a lot of young people. They are ready to marry. They cannot marry. You have 40-year-old women, girls, that cannot be asked for marriage because those who are to marry them have no jobs. Many of you have trained a lot of people. We have trained so many people, they have no jobs, and so these children cannot move. We are talking of a very, very important thing. I was in a meeting in Germany, my last, please, the Honorable Commission. I had a meeting in Germany, I was in a meeting in Germany, and I told the people while they were talking about migration. And I said, you went to Africa to take some people from Africa. Now we are being further impoverished. What you are doing now, take it or not. If Africa, because there is crisis everywhere in Africa, because of minerals, because of natural resources, they are coming to take it. If you think it's okay that the boats are capsizing, Africa will come to you, because humanity will take care of itself. When you are squeezed into a borehole, you will find a way to get out. And so Africa will come to Europe or to wherever they are if they cannot find a way out. I went to Sierra Leone, Senegal, in an island, 18 islands. We met with the people. Some of them have been, deported from Europe 4 times. They say they are going again, because in their islands, it is the foreign ships that are taking their fish. There is no place for them. So the issue of IMF, the world, we are not saying that we cannot exist with other members of the world. Nobody is an island anymore. We need to come together, but we must come on equal terms. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So next we'll have Kizito. Okay, so we can't. Oh, he's here. Oh, all right.
Honorable Commissioners, as Kizito takes the stage, may I also just say a quick statement? I disagree from what Mary has said about why the Asian tigers rose better than Africa, and because of the IMF programs there. I think I've just done a quick research to see that majority of the Asian tigers, the reason why they rose was not because of IMF bailout plans or IMF programs into their country. It was because the state itself intervened. The state intervened to protect their infant industries, and the state designed very strong capital controls. The same thing that Tunisia is also doing by rejecting IMF SAPs and IMF new programs being brought in. And you'll also see words from an important, esteemed, I think an economist, Joseph Stiglitz, and he also said about Greece, the reason why Greece got out of debt, right, is not because IMF came to bail it out, but he says, there was an entire debt write-off for Greece, and it was not to save Greece, but to save European banks. And I would advise everybody in the room here to get a hold of the book by Professor Lumba, who's written a book called Monetary Authorities. That book very succinctly speaks about racial capitalism and the supremacy of the US dollar. And that is the book that lays the foundations to show why the IMF and the World Bank are structurally strong global financial institutions that should not be replaced on the basis of white supremacy. So I would just like Mary to consider that carefully.
Thank you. I hadn't yet asked the question about the tiger economies, so you preempted. It was a preemptive strike, but there we go. So, Kizito, I just have one question for you, and my question is, we're here arguing against this international financial institutions, and yet the World Bank development policy financing includes pro-poor and pro-climate conditionalities. And in addition to that, they do take into account minimum spending on things such as health, which majority of the population that are poor rely on. So what is your take on that? Is the problem with implementation? Is it that they're not doing enough? What are your thoughts?
Hello. Thank you very much for the question. The issue really has been about the fact that whenever you go to somebody, let me take it on a lighter note, you go to someone to borrow money, you have a reason for walking into the person's office or premises to ask for that assistance. Of course, you might not be a charitable organization. This is to say that whatever loan that will be offered, whatever assistance that will be offered, you would expect some interest, some payback on the assistance that will be offered to you. But having said that, I'm trying to establish the fact that it lies not with the creditor then to set extreme conditions for the borrower, in the sense that whilst you may give certain conditions, maybe attached to the payment of the loan, probably in terms of the fiscals, my argument is that it lies completely wrong with the creditor's position to then dictate certain conditions that we've talked about. I mean, of course, and the most critical aspect of it has been what we said, the structures, the structural adjustment programs that are highlighted earlier when I took the stand. It lies not with the creditor then to make an argument that all these things ought to be done in order that you qualify for the assistance that I'm giving you. I don't know if that answers you.
To a certain extent, I think for me the thing that is left unanswered is if I don't feel convinced that I don't feel convinced that it is not for the creditor to set the criteria rather than the debtor country. I mean, is it because your argument is that the debtor country knows best what their needs are? Or is it, and what my thinking is that, look, we're aware that maybe structural adjustment programs have caused this XYZ damage, we've listened, we know, and now what we're saying is that even if you need to sort of shrink public spending, it should not go beyond a certain point. And so the question would, in my mind, be how far do we reduce? Is it enough? But I'm gathering that you're saying that it is up to the debtor country to say for themselves what they need.
You may have to repeat the question because I missed your point.
No, the question that I'm asking is, what is your argument? Is your argument that it is not for us Africans as borrowing countries to be dictated to what the floor should be? Is that what you're saying?
So lost.
Sorry, it seems to have.
It's that I'm not hearing you well. Or
5 minutes left.
Hi. Okay. So my question. Okay. Just rephrase your response to the question that I initially asked. No. It's okay. Just. No, just rephrase. I asked my question again. So my question initially was that when we are receiving this money from the IMF and the World Bank, there are usually pro-poor and pro-climate conditionalities that are included. And among that includes sometimes there being a limit as to a limit below which you cannot go to when it comes to spending on the provision of public services that are particularly relied on by the poor, so such as health care. So my question therefore is, what is your response to that? Because you're saying that the IMF is bad, all their conditionalities are terrible, the SAP is blah, blah, blah. But what I'm saying is that the IMF and the World Bank do have they do take into consideration these aspects. And my question to you was, what is your reaction to that?
Thank you very much. Let me answer you in another way. Of course, I mean, if you take a cursory look through Africa, you would see a number of Africans who have appeared before the IMF and the World Bank to take several loans. And out of these loans, as your argument says, are pro-poor conditions that are given to these African borrowers. But can you tell me, what has the pro-poor conditions that the IMF give contributed? How has they contributed to the benefits or to the well-being of the borrowers? If you cannot point to any one specific country that those conditions attached to, the loans that they took or the credit that they took have contributed to their well-being, then of course the larger African market, the larger African society, it's clear enough that these conditions that they set for, even including the pro-poor conditions, are in no way contributing to their growth or their benefit, or out of the situations they might have gone to the IMF and the World Bank to seek the credit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that response. Leila has a comment.
Please, Commissioners. So just to respond, I disagree with the take that you're putting up, that IMF has all these policies, and I'll tell you that's a non-issue. It is a flawed understanding of pro-poor policies, and it's also legally unsound, because if you look at the markers of the SDG 1, which simply says that by 2030 we should be able to meet SDG 1 so that there's no poverty in the country, poverty is on the rise. Income inequality, wealth inequality is on the rise. So if IMF indeed is asking for these provisions to be part and parcel of the debt conditions that is providing the continent, then it is definitely a wrong argument. Also, why? Because the Abuja Declaration of 2001 says African states must increase their health budget to 15%. That's a pro-poor policy measure. So if IMF is so much concerned about that, why isn't it pushing African governments to raise their health budget to 15%? Health budget is between 3 to 5%. So that argument just doesn't stand, and I would ask the commissioners to just dismiss it.
1 minute left.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Leila. I think the question that I would pose to you in response to your comment is that just because the IMF, well, I don't have an exact figure, but all I'm saying is that the IMF you cannot make the argument that they, simply because they're not pushing for 16%, that they're not pushing for pro-poor services. And essentially what I'm trying to say is that there's a flaw, okay? So meaning that you cannot spend below a certain amount on say health, so you cannot slash beyond a certain amount.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Leila. We'll wait to hear your submissions on this particular matter, and thank you, Kizito.
So then the last question goes to Honorable Shabalala.
As Honorable Shabalala works on that, the communication team, please cue the response that we have from the online team. 3 minutes.
So my question is just going to look at sort of the history of how we got here, because you touched on that in your presentation. So the first question is the IMF entirely to blame for the indebtedness of African countries? One, because there have been other factors at play. So for example, we had the oil crisis in the 70s and 80s. We had the global financial crisis in the 2010s. We have COVID. And then tied onto that question is what, therefore, should be how much attention should we really pay to the IMF, given that the profile of creditors has changed over time? So now we have a lot more commercial lenders that are playing in the market when it comes to debt, as compared to sort of IMF, World Bank, sort of government-to-government loans. And I think that will be my final question.
Thank you. So I want to answer you by taking you to Ghana, which was the first country to be so-called independent. That's why we even call it the so-called, because it is not. So you shouldn't be asking me questions as if you're talking about an ideally free Africa. I think let's put that on record first. Nkrumah did not want to go the IMF and World Bank route. If they are so committed to our liberation, Why didn't they respect that about him? He was a duly elected president of a so-called first independent country. Why would they have engineered a coup in Ghana in assistance with the secret services of the West to take him out, just to force Ghana to do exactly what he had asked them not to do? Now Ghana is sitting with a debt default economy, about the same thing that they were warned about. I hear you say there are other actors, but the traditional lenders for me in Africa remain, because there is something in HR called setting a precedent. They set a precedent on how Africa can be raped to the bone using the international financial system. So whoever came after copied from them. But remember, they are also not the first. They copied from the chartered mercantile companies, who's their predecessor. So no, I'll blame the IMF squarely, because I gave you the example of Zim also, where a sitting president says, I want to nationalize, I want to have state intervention in the economy. They engineer sanctions. Zimbabwe has been reduced to a basket case. They were, in the 80s, they were the agricultural provider for Southern Africa. They had food security that far exceeded a whole lot of countries. Today they are buying maize from South Africa. And you want to sit there and say that is not the IMF and WorldBank doing. I mean, if you want to understand the character of anything, you look at the root. They were never formed for African liberation in the first place. The World Bank was formed to restructure Europe after the war. And they used us to restructure their economy so that they are benefiting. I mean, the IMF tells us and the World Bank we should liberalize, open the economy. They are telling us now, and remember, they are not the lone voice, this is the cartel. Whenever the OECD speaks, you must also hear the IMF speaking at the back of your head. Whenever all these bodies that are not in the UN, when they speak, hear the IMF. They are telling us fossil fuels are bad. Do you know in Canada, they are subsidizing fossil fuels to the tune of 30 billion US dollars currently. They are telling us fossil fuels are bad. They are subsidizing fossil fuels. So they speak with a forked tongue for me. The IMF and World Bank have never been pro-African. They are not pan-African. They are not even pan-European. They're just pure fascist organizations.
Thank you for that response. I think that brings me to the end of my questions, and what I'd leave you with is, like we said, we must look at our backyard and see how we can get our house in order, whether that means uniting and fighting for what is right, whether that means reducing corruption, whether that means speaking up. We should all take responsibility for our future as a continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary, for daring to walk in that path. I am sure you will enrich our submissions. We now have Howard. Are we ready with the response online? No, we are not. Okay. If it could then be typed, and then probably it can go into the submissions and we can look at that. Distinguished people of Africa who thrived before mercantile trade and slave trade, and now we are almost being made poor. We are coming to the end of the African Commission inquiry on the high indebtedness, and we are about to be informed what the people of Africa want. And at this point, I'll invite the three councils to make their submissions. 10 minutes each. Keep it African. Africans are loud, Africans have energy, Africans are poetic. Robert, over to you.
Good evening. I'm going to be making closing remarks for the first accusation that basically was on debt. And we all had the presentation by the victim, Jacqueline. She touched base on what is happening here in Malawi. We also had evidence and facts that were brought forward by Mr. Pembele, who was the witness for allegation number 1. And in allegation number 1, what we wanted to highlight for the inquiry for the commissioners was to look into the debt contracting between African countries and the IMF and the World Bank, and especially to demonstrate that the contracting is very discriminatory, especially when it comes to taxes, and also when it comes to the credit rating systems. For instance, when Jacqueline was giving her witness statement, we could all hear what she said about how the government has cut down on socio-economic rights for the people in Malawi. We also heard her talking about how the government has cut down on fuel levies that has in place led to the increase in the prices of fuel, and that in general makes the living cost in Malawi very high. And it's my submission that the conditionalities that are put forth by the IMF are leading to this. And they're leading to this because these conditions are put forward as a deliberate policy choice that are imposed on African countries. So what we would want the tribunal and the commission to look forward for is that we want the IMF to look into issues of debt restructuring with the African countries, and also adjustment measures that come in to say that they're not going to they're not going to reduce the benefits for the vulnerable communities, and also issues of moratoriums for debt in African countries. Currently, we do not have any moratoriums on debt by the IMF, and that is one of the issues that we're pushing for, that there need to be moratoriums, there need to be debt restructuring and debt reliefs as a standard option in the annual country reports. For instance, Nigeria has also implemented various reforms to address the debt crisis, but challenges also continue to remain, like the high spending on socio-economic programs, because the debts that they are getting, they are coming with conditionalities to cut down on spending on austerity measures, and that in itself is a human rights issue that also needs to be looked into. And also the conditionalities that are being put forth by IMF, we need for the African countries also to come in as through maybe the AU to ask for more voting rights as is in the IMF. And these in itself will bring forth the African rights, and also will maybe give more strength to the African countries. And the issues we raised, we had 3 questions that we needed answers towards. And one of the issues was to ask, do we need for a reformed, fair and decentralized credit rating agency? And my answer to that will be in the affirmative, to say yes, we do, because these credit rating agencies do not treat African countries well, and that is what leads to higher loans and higher interest rates that are discriminatory in nature. Because what African countries...
You have 5 minutes left.
What African countries are getting as interest rates are higher compared to the global north, and that is not fair for African countries. We also looked into the framing of debt contracts, and clearly, even from the other allegation, it was clear that the debt framing in Africa with the IMF is not equal, it's unequal because of unequal bargaining power, also lack of transparency and local oversight over the same, and the conditionality clauses that are put forth in the contracts leading to from the IMF Articles of Agreement, Article 5, Section 3. We also have demonstrated to the commissioners the role of IMF in the debt crisis, and this is due to the conditionalities that are put and the reluctant nature of the IMF in restructuring a precondition for granting new loans, while the IMF, and also that the IMF is very reluctant to also recommend the same. And it does not also hesitate to demand for stringent adjustment measures in debtor countries. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Council. We take note of your submission, and if you could, we will give you an email where you can give us the written submissions to help us as we write the judgment. Thank you very much. A round of applause for Robert. Council, are we in agreement, or are you ready? We can discuss.
Honorable members of the tribunal, I come before you today to institute the findings that have come up from to talk about the issues, the legal issues, the facts, and the rule of law, and the findings that have come out of it. We noticed, as our witnesses and victims had presented to us, the information that was quite key for this exercise. We noted that African countries spend 22 times more on debt servicing than social protection. This is organized cruelty disguised as fiscal responsibility. 43 African countries are cutting $183 billion between 2022 and 2026 under pressure from these institutions, while 25 countries, 16 of them African, spend more debt repayment than on education, health, social protection combined. So what are the systematic legal violations? These institutions have led systemic violations of binding international law. They have, number one, violated the right of health. In Sierra Leone, as evidenced through our key expert witness, had IMF wage caps at 6% of GDP, well below 9% global average. This created a health crisis.
The country maintains only 7 nurses per 10,000 patients, against the recommended 83 by WHO. Number 2, it violated the right of education. Number 1, it actually violates Article 12 of the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Number 2, it's violation of education, which violates Article 13 of the ICESR and disproportionately affects girls, constituting gender discrimination. I'm sorry. Maybe I need some water. I'm sorry. Sierra Leone post-Ebola experience shows how IMF austerity froze education budgets and halted teacher recruitment precisely when rebuilding was needed. Number 3, what else was violated? It was the rights of social security. This violates Article 9, thank you so much. Article 9, 12 and 13 of the ICESR to ensure minimal social security levels. Most African countries spend less than 1% of GDP on social assistance while being forced to prioritize debt. How are we surviving? Number 4, with the violation of the doctrine of maximum available resources. When countries spend 22 times more on debt than social protection, they demonstrably fail to use maximum available resources for human rights. The core obligation under Article 2.1 of the ICSR. The UN Committee has emphasized the obligation is immediate and non-derogable. It needs to be the right to be suspended or restricted. Therefore, what exactly was our case study? Our case study was Sierra Leone, Tunisia, bits of Malawi, as demonstrated by our fellow witnesses. There's a pattern in it. Healthcare workers, there were healthcare worker shortages. There was deterioration in the education system. There was systematic transfer of social costs from states to individuals, particularly women. In the DRC, less than 4% of the budget goes to health, while 80% of citizens pay out of pocket for medical care. Okay, the legal authorities we have cited. That's ICESR, social cultural rights, CEDAW.
You have 5 minutes left.
The African Charter of Human People's Rights. These establish binding obligations that admit no exceptions for fiscal convenience. When the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights issues authoritative interpretations of state obligations, these carry legal weight that cannot be dismissed for macroeconomic theories. Based on this evidence, we request this tribunal declare, number 1. First, the austerity conditionalities systematically violate the International Covenant of Economic and Social and Cultural Rights and constitute discrimination against women under CEDAW. Second, the IMF and WorldBank must bear institutional responsibility for deaths and suffering caused by their policies, including acknowledgement that deaths like Lydie's father resulted from their systematic defunding of essential services. Third, reparation should be sought to address healthcare, education, social protection deficits created by decades of austerity. This includes emergency funding to restore healthcare systems, rebuild education, and establish social protection floors. Fourth, human rights-based alternatives that prioritize progressive realization of economic and social rights with mandatory human rights impact assessments for all lending programs. Fifth, IMF and WorldBank write off all existing loans due to fiscal constraint and instead position itself in providing only grants. I rest my case.
3 minutes left.
Thank you.
Seems like, councils, you have set a precedent for 7 minutes as opposed to 10 minutes. Dr. Leila, I don't know whether that will apply to you. You have 10 minutes. If you stick to the precedent, the better.
Farin, you chose to drop water here. It was very bad manners. I'm just joking. Anyway, so I'm going to start by presenting some statistics, and then I'm going to have the asks for the Commission. And allow me to read, because I've just been typing this as we speak. So, the Burundian professor Leonce Ndikumana, fantastic guy, you must read his work. He has documented that Africa has collectively lost $1 trillion in illicit financial flows. Let that amount sink in. UNCTAD has estimated that annually Africa loses $89 billion because of capital flight, illicit financial flows. The Tax Justice Network has revealed that the world loses over $400 billion in corporate tax avoidance annually. Corruption and money laundering costs the global economy between 3 to 6% of the GDP of the world. That's a lot of money. The SDGs need financing in the sum of $4 trillion. Now, Oxfam, this is interesting. Oxfam audited the World Bank, and in their audit, they revealed that about $41 billion in climate finance from the World Bank's portfolio is unaccounted for. These are huge figures. And these are figures with implications. Now, Oxfam has also documented that in 2021, 85% of IMF loans required governments to adopt austerity measures. I should probably just end here, because that in itself is a telling statement. Now, this is the design of the global financial system that decenters capital from Africa and centers that capital within Western nations. And this is the reason we are here with the 4 legal issues that we have against IMF and World Bank, because their policies have generated this degenerative sort of an economic ordering that is not supporting African growth and African fiscal sovereignty. So on the issues related to IMF-designed structural adjustment programs, which was issue number 3, and on the issue related to the IMF and the World Bank's structurally privileged global financial system, which was issue number 4, the Commission should pronounce itself on the following 4 asks from ourselves. And in my opening statements and through the expert witnesses we had alongside our victim, we've already established through facts and empirical evidence the retrogression that has been engineered by IMF and World Bank. So the Commission should pronounce itself first on 1, that the IMF and the World Bank have deliberately created and maintained a global financial system that perpetuates colonial economic relationships through modern financial mechanisms. This was proven. It has systematically discriminated against African nations in resource allocation, voting rights, and access to finance. Victim number 3 already spoke about the asymmetries in SDR allocation. The World Bank and the IMF, together, that financial system that they have created constitutes structural economic subjugation that violates the fundamental principle of sovereign equality. Both Mr. Pembe and Madame Ene already established that in their expert testimony. The second pronouncement the Commission should make is that the IMF and the World Bank have irreparably failed their mandate and must be replaced. Because 80 years of operation has entrenched inequality rather than promoting development. Governance structures that have been created in 1944 cannot be reformed to serve 21st century needs. And these institutions have become vehicles for extraction rather than development, and we gave evidence of the interest rates between Kenya and Germany just to put this point home. The third pronouncement that the Commission should make is that a new global fund is recommended to be established based on two things: a governance structure and a new SDR system. For the governance structure, we want one country, one vote, which is a true democratic representation. We want regional rotation of leadership positions.
5 minutes left.
We want transparent decision-making with public participation, and we do not want a single country to have veto power. On the SDR system, we want allocation to be based on combination of population, development needs, climate vulnerability. The SDR value basket must include commodities, not the GBP, the USD, the REN, and the Euro. It's got to have gold, oil, and strategic minerals to be able to give Africa that currency valuation that it requires, right? We just don't want to see currencies. We want recognition of natural resource wealth in allocation formulas, and we want automatic allocation during global crisis based on impact, not economic size. And finally, the Commission should pronounce itself that immediate moratorium on all debt service to IMF and World Bank be declared pending institutional transition to a new global fund housed in Africa. We need to see an audit of all existing debts for legitimacy and legality. And we need to see a transfer of SDR allocations from overrepresented to underrepresented nations. Let this be the order of the Commission to compensate Africa for the economic damage that has been inflicted through the IMF asymmetrical policies. The end.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Commission will start by thanking Aphrodite and all its partners, all of you who have come from various countries to participate in this Commission. We thank the technical teams, we thank the advocates who have led their complainants, the witnesses, and the experts to give us their views. We thank the person who stood for the World Bank and IMF. We thank our timekeepers. And tomorrow, we'll continue with the Commission report, our findings on what you have tendered before us as form of evidence, and the arguments of the World Bank and IMF. They will make recommendations in our final report. So the Commission stands closed for today. Thank you very much. We need that their papers badly.
Thank you so much, Councillor. Some few logistical announcements, but before that, just a quick overview of tomorrow's program. As per guided by the Council, Tomorrow we'll continue. Specifically, we'll hear the judgment from our distinguished judges here present. And then the next item on the agenda for tomorrow will be a launch of a legal study on debt in Malawi, a report which was commissioned by Pan-African Lawyers Union with AfroDat. So they did a report on that. So we'll witness its launch tomorrow. So we'll have a brief overview of the report, the summary of the report, and then we'll launch it tomorrow. And then we also have a panel of discussion, which will be children-led panel of discussion on the impact of debt on social protection and public investment in children. And after that, the last but one item on the agenda, we also have a panel to discuss issues of debt and elections. I know most of the African countries will be going to pause this year, including Malawi. Ours is immediate. September 16th, we'll be going to the pause for the general elections. How best can we profile debt issues to become an elections agenda? So we'll have discussions around that tomorrow as well. And then the last agenda for tomorrow will be a press conference that will engage members of the press from different countries. We have members of the press from other countries as well, Ghana and other countries, including Malawi. So we'll have a press conference to round up everything. So that's how tomorrow looks like. We still have the afternoon tea. So as we are going back, please, it's being served at the back of this hall. So there is a door there. We just go at the back of this hall. That's where tea is being served. For the local participants, in terms of logistics, pass by the registration desk at the door. You'll be well taken care of. Otherwise, thank you so much for being a very lively audience today. It's been so great, so interesting, full of knowledge and knowledge exchange and sharing. So let's clap hands for ourselves for the participation. And a big hand, also a round of applause for our councils here. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. Let's convene tomorrow at 8:30 sharp so that we exhaust the program and call it a day in good time.
To make sure that the government accepts.
All right, thank you.
That should be the issue. How do we force the government now to accept? So it should be a condition of the loan that you publish the loan in digital platforms, and you must accept accountability and transparency and participatory approach to managing all those things. And that parliament should be enhanced too.
A part of the solution is integration of Africa. We will never be able to negotiate as these small countries.
Because that is what we should tell them. Yeah. Because no one country will go and negotiate for